I talked about 3 criteria to be considered a martyr in the classical period. And when I say classical period, what do I mean when I say classical period in this course? Right, before the 4th century. Actually, not BC AD, but you know what I'm talking about. We all know the same thing. 4th century, right? Who can tell me what was one of the criteria?
You had to be killed out of hate for your faith.
So one of the criteria is it had to be a result of hatred for the faith. Who can remember the second?
That has to be voluntary.
Correct. Or it had to be voluntary. This is not suicide, but voluntary. Meaning you were conscious of the actions that you were taking would lead to death. And the third? Correct. An actual death had to take place. I said how St. Augustine had an alternative definition of a martyr. Who remembers what that is? It was a little phrase that I said.
Martyrdom is not defined by actions, but by reasons.
Right. So we can say not actions, but reasons. It's not what you did that determines whether or not you're a martyr. It's the reasons behind those who killed you. Right? We're going to talk about today when we look at Polycarp, which is what we're going to get to today. We might get the origin today, and we might have to carry him over. But we're definitely going to spend time on Polycarp. We're going to spend time on Polycarp, and I want to tease out, in addition to these criteria, these 2 criteria that play with each other, the theme. There's certain themes that when you compare, when we read Polycarp today, and then we think back of what we read for Perpetua and Felicity, there's going to be, and then you also compare the martyr, that all the Christians would have known the story of Jesus. When you compare those 3, there's certain things that keep rising out of this martyrdom. Okay, and I want to identify that today, and I also want to identify the story of Polycarp itself. It is embedded with very, how do I put it? Images, words, and situations that mimic Jesus' passion. Remember, Polycarp was before the story of Perpetua and Felicity. Right? We did it backwards. We did Perpetua and Felicity. Polycarp was before. So there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to be able to pull out of here that is even closer to the original Christian communities than even Perpetua and Felicity was. Right? That we can pull out of it, some theology. That's it. First, let's talk about Polycarp himself. We don't know a lot about Polycarp, but we do know, remember what I said before with Perpetua and Felicity, if these stories, which start off as oral, continue to be told over and over and over again, obviously the person has some type of significance. So we know that Polycarp had to be someone who was considered a leader among the Christian community, one that was admired. We know from archaeological evidence that he was a bishop, supervisor, overseer of the Christian community in Smyrna, which is modern day Turkey. right, or in modern day Turkey. We know that he died at the age of 86 years old in 156 AD, which means, you do the math, he was born relatively 3.5, 4 decades after Jesus' death, which means he could have very well had communication with people who eyewitnessed Jesus. Tradition says that he was a disciple of St. John the Evangelist, the St. John. That's what tradition says. Regardless of whether or not he actually was a disciple of St. John, it doesn't matter. The math simply tells us he would have been around to communicate with Christians who were eyewitnesses to Jesus' life. At least were alive at the same time Jesus was alive. Okay? One of the things I want to point out to you right off the bat, if you have the text in front of you, is going to help today. Telling you going forward, when we have these supplemental texts, if you have them in front of you, it's going to be helpful. Right off the bat, in this exhortation, in this story of martyrdom, of Polycarp, in the introduction, this is significant. It says, God's church at Smyrna writes to his church at Philomelium and to all the communities of the Holy Catholic Church residing everywhere. The reason why this is significant, this document, which dates back to the 2nd century, is referring to the church as the Catholic Church. Not capital C Catholic. All right, so we're not talking about the institution which is today identified as the Roman Catholic Church. But it does emphasize the fact that the early Christians saw themselves, each community, as part of something bigger. Because the word Catholic is the word Catholic. Means, comes from a Latin word that means pertaining to the whole. Pertaining to the whole, or universal. So by referring it to itself as Catholic, it was referring it to itself not as a noun, but as that's sort of an adjective, right? It's the Catholic Church. It's a universal church. And again, I just point that out so that we know from the very beginning the church saw itself as more than just as individual communities, but part of a larger body. Also around this time, Christians began to embrace the term Christian. Even in the New Testament, in the Acts of the Apostles, the first time they're called Christians, they were called Christians as a derogatory term. Right? Those Christians. We start seeing in the 2nd century, they start embracing the term Christian because they saw themselves as Catholic, universal church, but even within the church, remember I think we talked about in this class. Did we talk about Gnosticism in this class yet? We did?
So just a little bit.
A little bit. Okay, we're gonna talk about more of it later. But so you had Gnostic Christians. They wanted to be differentiated from the Gnostics. So that's why they took on Christians. Because the Gnostics would have names based upon their leaders. Right? And you'll start hearing lists of them as we get into next week and the week after. They wanted to be differentiated from that, from this community, this Catholic Church, so they embraced Christians. This is one of the earliest documents that actually has identifying as an adjective the Catholic Church. On the next page, on page 56, this is something I wanted to point out that is key to martyrdom theology. That first full paragraph right in the middle. We haven't got to Polycarp yet. All right, the writer of this document is simply still speaking about martyrs in general. And he says there, right in the middle of that paragraph, yet the martyrs themselves displayed such bravery that not one of them let out a murmur or sigh. In this, they demonstrated to everyone that at that moment they were being tortured, these most noble martyrs of Christ were already away from their bodies, or rather the Lord was right there beside them, communing with them. Who remembers when we looked at perpetual and felicity, who can give me some examples of this thought in that account? Alexander? She had two visions. Well, okay, I can see what you're saying. So you're saying, that's good, yes. Yeah, that's good of the visions, you're right. What I mean is in the actual accounts that took place, this idea, let's go.
That one guy who got stabbed, he didn't think it was
So you have Saturnus, right? So you have Saturnus, who it says that when the executioner unsheathed his sword and pierced his bones, Saturnus did not make a sign. Right? So that tells us, remember, Perpetua and Felicity was after this. So you have this idea, this thought that a martyr is so comfortable where they are. They've by time it hits them, by time they actually receive the punishment, they're not even associated with their bodies. They're communing with Christ. That was one example. There was another example in Perpetual Felicity. Anybody remember? It was with Perpetual. You're that person on Jeopardy that pushed the button just to mess everybody up. All right. Anybody remember? Ryan, you think you remember? Right. So she gets attacked by the cow, thrown in the air. She gets up and fixes herself. Right. She's not. This ain't even bothering me. Okay. There's one more, and I forgot to bring it up. And I didn't even talk about Felicity because I was talking about the other murder. So Felicity, and this is on me. I should have brought this up. I did bring this up. Do you remember what was Felicity's condition when she was put in jail? She was pregnant.
She wanted to have her kid so that she could then go be sacrificed.
Correct, right? She was like, I gotta hurry up and have this kid so I can get killed. Right? And she could say it that way. But the point is, she wanted to be martyred. She knew she was gonna get martyred, but she wanted to be martyred with the other Christians, not with common criminals, she said. But when she had the child, if you go back and look at it, one of the jailers, I believe it was one of the jailers, was teasing her. Somebody was teasing her about the pain that she was in, that she was going through such a painful, I mean, could you imagine having a child in a jail? Let me tell you something. I watched my wife have 6 children, all natural. She never had anything the entire time. I'm talking nothing except oxygen. That was it. That's all she had. Okay, hold on. So my first child was born, I was in the military. There were naval men in the room, 6 of them, holding her down. She kicked one all the way across the room, and I'm not exaggerating. He fell all into the oxygen tanks and everything. It was hilarious. Now, it wasn't hilarious then. I was like, she a freak of nature. Like, this is not normal. The point is, that's how extreme the pain is. But Felicity said, because they teased her and said, you think this is painful, wait until you get in front of the animals. And her answer was, the animals are gonna be nothing. Right? In other words, not because this is bad, the animals gonna be nothing, but because she was already, at that point, she's shedding her blood. That's what she wants, right? She's being a witness to Christ. She's so far gone from worrying about any physical pain then. Right? So this is a theme that is carried on. And again, we see it early on starting here. Tristan, do you have something? Oh, your answer. Okay. All right. So this is what we see early on, is this idea that there are already, Christ is there present with them. Now, even though this is a martyrdom theology, if we talk about today, who knows what sacrament has that same idea that in the suffering, Christ is there suffering with you? Extreme unction, which can you okay.
Anointing of the sick.
Thank you. Anointing of the sick, right? So the point I'm trying to bring is we're going to talk about this as we go through the history of the theology. It switches. It's a huge switch next week when Christianity no longer is concerned with martyrdom, because they become, instead of the ones being hunted, they become the power. Right? They're used, strategically used by Constantine, and they switch roles. So you have this theology, though, of sacrifice, this theology of Christ communing with those who are suffering. It gets carried over in the theology, but in different ways. All right. I want to point out one thing, just because I think it's interesting. On page 57, when the author, again, we haven't got the Polycarp yet, but the author is trying to give an example, setting up Polycarp. He gives an example of a good martyr and a bad martyr. In his example, he mentions Germanicus, who was a good martyr. Why was a good martyr? Because when he was confronted with the beast and they threatened him with the beast, according to the author, he actually grabbed the beast and pulled the beast toward him. Bring it on, right? Bring it on. But this is the key, he was captured. Germanicus was captured. And then when he was placed in front of the beast, he was threatened, he just grabbed it. This is versus this other martyr who talked a lot of stuff, and it says volunteered himself to the authorities. This was Quintus. He volunteered himself. But then when he saw, it literally says he chickened out, which I didn't even know that was an action. I thought that was a pop term. Apparently that translates from ancient Greek to chickened out, okay? It says he took one look at the beast and was like, oh, you know what? I changed my mind. Praise Rome, whatever he had to do to get out of there. Point is, there's an element of humility, there's an element of meekness to a martyr. Not meekness when it's in front of them, but you're not so full of pride that you're gonna throw yourself to the authorities. You're gonna be like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, what you gonna do? Because that is a false humility, because when that beast get in front of you, you chicken out. I have to look at that is in the Greek, because now I'm very interested in what Greek is for chickened out. And that's just my own convention. It's crazy to me. All right. I just wanted to point that out. So again, there's another theme there. So you got a theme that there's a calmness with a genuine martyr. Calmness when they face it. But at the same time, there's a humility or a meekness in when you're living out the faith. You're not just being prideful. You're not just showing up with a sign on you saying, do what you're gonna do to me, because that's not what we do, according to the author. As he says, the gospel simply doesn't teach that. So now let's talk about Polycarp himself, or the arrest of Polycarp himself. In this sequence that I'm going to read, and I hope that you follow along, because I'm going to ask you to point out some things after I read. This entire sequence is chock full of references to Jesus. Subtle, some are not subtle. References to Jesus, okay? And I want you guys to pick it out. I'm gonna read a paragraph at a time, and I want you guys to pick them out for me. I'm gonna start right off the bat. Under that section that says the arrest of Polycarp. It says, but Polycarp, who was much more worthy of admiration, wasn't bothered in the least when he first heard about the persecution. He intended to remain within Smyrna's city limits, but most people advised him to slip away quietly So he withdrew to a little farm in the suburbs where he stayed with a few friends. Day and night, he did nothing but pray for all mankind and for the whole church worldwide, as was his normal custom. 3 days prior to his arrest, while he was in prayer, Polycarp fell into a trance and received a vision. He saw his pillow completely consumed by fire. Turning to his companions, he said, "I have to be burned alive." Who can see any reflection, any subtle, this one is a little bit more subtle, but subtle reflections of Jesus?
He withdrew to pray.
He withdrew to pray, right? That very wording that he withdrew to pray is consistently said in the Gospels about Jesus. It's a good one.
Well, he also.
One, Andrew, give me one.
Okay, I'll give you one. He told his followers that he had to die.
Not only did he have to die, but how did he say he had to die?
He had to be burned.
And what happens?
That's what happened.
That's what happens, right? So, I mean, but the fact he didn't just die, I want to point out that he said exactly how he was going to die, all right? Which Jesus did the same thing. He told his friends exactly how he was going to die. All right, so that was one. There's one other one. This one should not be subtle.
He said he wasn't bothered by when he heard about.
That's true. That's one. It's more of a subtle one. There's one that is, I mean, scream at you. 3 days. Anytime you see something about 3 days, okay, that is clearly making a reference to Jesus, right? 3 days between crucifixion and resurrection. 3 days. So anytime you see 3 days, that's what they're appealing to. Good. All right, let's keep going. This is a little bit long of a read, but it is full. The authorities kept pursuing Polycarp, so he moved to another farm. No sooner had he departed than the searchers arrived behind him. When they didn't find him, they seized 2 slave boys, and one of them confessed under torture. Really, it was quite impossible for Polycarp to avoid capture, since the ones who betrayed him were members of his own household. Now the police chief, who was predestined to have the name Herod, urgently wanted to bring him into the stadium. All this happened so Polycarp will fulfill his destiny and become a partaker with Christ, while the betrayers eventually receive the punishment of Judas himself. All right, Alexander.
This time in the assembly, literally explicit by saying Herod and Judas.
Herod was the police chief's name. Okay, that is a direct connection, right? And then it mentions Judas, that the betrayers received the punishment of Judas. What was the punishment of Judas? He hung himself, right? So there's an assumption that these betrayers were hung. Tristan?
It says that it was impossible for him to avoid capture since one of his betrayers was a member of his own household.
So it came from his inner circle, right? That's obviously another direct connection to Jesus. There's more there. Anyone see some of the others? There's one that I'm expecting my theology corner here to get, and ain't nobody disappointing me. There's one that's real, it's subtle, but it's also obvious. Subtle but obvious at the same time.
In one of the Gospels, they feel language that it was necessary for Jesus to die so that he could, I forget the exact word, but it's the same group had to die so that he could fulfill his destiny.
So that's not the one I'm looking for, but that's good. There's passages, especially in Matthew, because remember Matthew is the gospel that is speaking to the Jewish Christians. But there are passages that say that Jesus had to do what he did. It had to happen in order for, and it would say a prophecy to be fulfilled, right? That's a good one. All right, I'm gonna give you this one. How many slave boys did they seize? How many betrayed him?
One.
When Jesus was on the cross, how many were hung with him?
2.
And how many mocked him? So you have this underlying idea, again, of this 3. All right. Only one betrayed him. It's kind of a play, right? There's more conversation with Jesus in the gospel of the one who was actually recognizing who he was. But then that meant that you still had the one that was mocking him, right? This is the opposite. You got 2 slave boys and one is betraying. Right? So it's that slight, subtle connection with the passion story. All right? But it's pulling. Remember, we talked about the author is setting up what is a good martyr and what's a bad martyr. He's trying to set Polycarp up to be, next to Jesus, the martyr, right? Look at what happened to him. It is so much just like what happened with Christ. Let's go to the next paragraph. So then, taking the slave boy along, the mounted police officers set out on a Friday about supper time, armed with all their usual weaponry, as if they were pursuing a robber. Late that evening, they closed in on him, found him reclining in a little bedroom upstairs. Even then, he still had a chance to escape somewhere else, but he decided against it, saying, God's will be done. When he heard the police arrive, he went downstairs and talked with them. The officers noticed his advanced age and quiet dignity and were astonished at all the eagerness to arrest such a respectable gentleman. Right away, Polycarp ordered food and drink set before the officers, as much as they wanted. Then he asked them to grant 1 hour for him to pray undisturbed. When they said yes, he stood and prayed, but he was so full of God's grace that he couldn't be silent for 2 straight hours. All who heard him were amazed, and many regretted having to pursue such a godly old man. All right, here we go. What do you see there? It's full of it. It's full of it. Good full of it. But sometimes I tell people full of it, and that's not a good thing. This is good. It's full of it. Who can give me some? Alexander?
The soldiers came with an entire army.
Yep. That's first thing, right, Sarah? Friday, right? Friday supper. Okay, it's Friday supper time. Marissa?
Reclining in
Upper room. He's reclining in an upper room. All right. He's reclining in an upper room. That's awesome. That's a good one.
It's at night.
It's at night. Yeah. Jimmy? God's will be done. Awesome. Christian? And what's key is not only so we got a couple plays here on Jesus. First of all, at this point, everyone knows that Jesus had a last meal. All right, so it's at the Passover, right? Later on, I think it says the Sabbath, right? Oh, that's the next paragraph. I'm checking on myself. All right, so they had a meal, number 1. Number 2, notice it says they could have as much as they wanted. So you have this idea that he was able to provide more than what they actually needed. All right, which would be, technically a better life, even though I don't think Eucharist has really worked out completely at this point. But the point is, you're having these illusions to the gospel.
Talks about 1 hour of prayer, but it isn't.
Which the significance of that is, when Jesus is last night, what did he keep complaining about his disciples? You can't even stay up and pray with them. But here, they're like, you can pray as long as we're gonna give you an hour, you took 2. Right? So it's just this prayer, this idea of prayer just prior to his arrival. There's one more thing that I wanted to point out.
Was it the prayer just like Jesus' prayer in John 17, like a prayer for the church and the whole world?
That's the key. That is the key. It's repeated, but yes, absolutely. So that's what Jesus prayed for according to the Gospel of John, on his final night.
the part where Polycarp and Jesus both had a chance to escape, but they both chose their fate.
One of my favorite, now I know I got a lot, I say this a lot, but one of my favorite boss moments with Jesus is when they come and they say, oh, who is Jesus? And he says, I am, and they all pass out. Oh, that is a boss. That is a boss moment. Okay. He said it's so now, obviously, the I am is the same thing that God said to Moses. Moses said, who's sending? Who do I tell Pharaoh who sent me? I am. So God in the flesh is repeating it, and it's so powerful. It literally says that they all passed out. That's some strong. I'm sorry, that is a boss moment. Okay. My Jesus is pop. My Jesus talked a lot of stuff. I don't know how y'all Jesus was, but in my mind, Jesus was hard. Okay, he wasn't going out like no punk. Okay, he was making sure that you understood. I'm running this. You ain't taking my life. I'm giving it. I'm just saying. That's just me. So here he's also this is the same type of cases taking place. There's one other thing, and I'll bring this up. Apparently, I am stuck on the slave boy. Notice it says that they took the slave boy along. The slave boy betrayed him, right? They took the slave boy along. Who went with the mob with Jesus to identify who Jesus was? Judas, the betrayer, right? So again, these are things that are being pointed out to show the connection between Jesus's passion and what's happening to Polycarp. I'm gonna read the last paragraph and then the first sentence into the last paragraph. This will take us home with this sequence. At last, when he finished his prayer, after remembering everyone he had ever met, whether great or small, famous or obscure, as well as the whole worldwide Catholic Church, it was time to depart. The officer set him on a donkey and led him into the city. Now it was a high Sabbath day. The police chief Herod came out to meet him along with his father, Lachetus. After transferring Polycarp to their carriage, they sat down beside him and tried to persuade him, saying, "What's the matter? What harm is there in saying Caesar is Lord? As you make a little sacrifice and do what's required, it's the only way to save your life." At first, Polycarp gave no reply to them, but when they persisted, he finally said, "I have no intention of doing what you're advising." All right, conclusion of this sequence. Give me some comparisons to Jesus.
Then putting him on the donkey and leading him into the city.
You cannot get more direct than that. Maybe Herod. Herod was pretty direct too, but they put him on a donkey, all right, and led him into the city. That's one. What else we got here? If you read in Jesus' account, as they were marching him from judgment hall to judgment hall, Jesus did not say anything. Okay? He did not say anything. Again, boss moment. He did not say anything until Pontius Pilate, which is another, I'll just give you this one. This is another comparison when Pontius Pilate was basically saying the same thing as here. We have the power to save your life. This is all you have to do. Jesus had not said anything until Pontius Pilate said, "I can save your life." Jesus was like, "Oh, wait a minute, you need to get something straight. I lay down my life. You do not have the power to take my life or give it." Mic drop. Just so you know, Jesus is like, I have to say something to this. All right. And so Polycarp, that's the only time he responds when they are persistent. He finally says, "You know what? I have no intention of doing what you're asking me to do. Stop asking me." Okay. The point I wanted to make, going through the sequence, this entire story, as it's being told, and not as it's being written and read, the whole thing is to bring to mind the passion of Christ through the story of the martyr, which again goes through the idea that the martyr and Jesus are so intertwined that even the events that partake in the last elements of their life start to repeat themselves. Okay. In addition to the connection with Jesus, if you look following that whole sequence, as Polycarp is taken into the stadium, as he's about to be burned, he hears a voice from heaven. Anyone who has the reading in front of them, what does the voice from heaven say? Christian?
Be strong and courageous, Polycarp.
Does anyone know where at in Scripture the voice from heaven said, "Be strong and courageous"? Andrew?
First chapter of Joshua.
So, the God of the Old Testament, God the Father, when Joshua received the commission from Moses to take on God's promised people to their promised land, God said to Joshua the same exact words, "Be strong and courageous." Again, you're making this connection with Polycarp. This is not, he is so in line. Not only does his life events correspond with Jesus' passion, but the very voice who speaks to him is God the Father, telling him to be strong and courageous. Now, before we conclude Polycarp's situation here, I want to take this opportunity to explain to you why the Christians at that time would not, because let me put it this way, time and time again, especially here in Polycarp, it was also in Perpetua, there's this idea of all you have to do is just to give a oath of allegiance. And it has that just idea, like it's something small. It demonstrates that to the Roman people, that oath meant one thing, and to the Christians, it meant something different. Today, I'll give you an example. Today, if you are a Christian, you still only worship and adore God, Father, Son, and or Holy Spirit. However, if you're a Christian, is it, listen to generally, because there are Christian traditions that do feel this way. But generally speaking, if I see a king of a nation or a monarch of a nation, and the custom is to bow to the king. If I bow to the king, does that mean I'm worshiping the king? If I pledge allegiance to the flag, does that mean I'm worshiping the flag? Right? If the president walks in here, regardless of what side of the aisle I sit on, the president of the United States walks in here, okay? First, I'm probably gonna peel myself a little bit because I'm very president. Woohoo! I'm a fanboy of the president. I don't care who the president is because I was in the military. All right. But if the president come in, I'm going to show him honor, right? I'm going to show him respect because of his office. The Romans, I should say the Gentiles, I'm not gonna say the Romans. The Gentiles felt giving this oath of allegiance to the emperor was just that. Right? All you're asking us to do is to honor the office. The Christians saw it a little bit different. Why? Because this oath was actually, and this is something that's lost in translation. When they say oath, what they were actually giving allegiance or honor to the genus of emperor. Genus is a root. Genus is a Latin word, but it comes from a root word in Greek, which is daemon. Daemon, translated into English, is demon. Now, in a Christian context, demon has a negative connotation. But the word demon, just the word demon, is neither negative nor positive. Demon is it's the same thing as just saying a spirit being. Right? It's a spirit. So what the Romans were asking the Christians to do was to honor or give us oath of allegiance. It wasn't to that emperor, it was to the spirit of the emperor, right? The genus of the emperor. That's why they didn't do it. This ain't about, and this kind of goes, which we're not going to get to, but this kind of goes into an origin when he talks about there's a difference between, well, it's a false difference between what I say and what I actually believe. What you confess, what you say to Christians is exactly what you believe, which means if you give an oath, a swear of allegiance to the genus of emperor, to the spirit of the emperor, that means that there's only one God, and you're giving your oath of allegiance to another spirit being, you're worshiping someone other than God. That's how serious the Christians took it. That's why, in 1 second, Andrew, that's why people like Polycarp could not participate. Right? So even though the Romans are saying, just swear, dude, just swear it off, do what you want to do. Just swear it off so we can save your life. Nope, won't do it.
Didn't the Romans also like see the emperor as one of their deities too, like because of his office?
Right, but I think they saw more the office. So whoever was in that office had the genus of emperor, the spirit
Right.
within that person. Otherwise, that person wouldn't be in that position. Does that make sense? Which is the reason why you have governors who started feeling themselves and said, I should be emperor. People would actually get behind that. Right? That's why it was a belief system. It was a genuine belief system. It wasn't something simple. But the Christians took it, it wasn't, so the Romans would use it, I don't want to say it, they could use it to their advantage, right? The Christians were like, no, this ain't something you just do on the whim. This is serious stuff for Christianity. Particularly because of the monotheism. They only believed there was one God. If you live in a polytheistic society where there's a lot of gods, this ain't nothing. Just do it. You can do your God, but just do this. Remember, they think in polytheistic society. Christianity is only one God. If I give my worship to that spirit, that's not God. I'm worshiping the spirit. Okay? Last thing I want to mention about Polycarp, I want you to notice on page 61, well, actually two things. One is real short. On page 61, the final paragraph. This is after Polycarp has been judged. He's going to be executed. And they determine he's going to be executed by being burned at the stake. It says there in 61, so then, quicker than words can tell, the crowd immediately gathered logs and sticks from nearby workshops and baths. Notice this comment. As usual, the Jews were especially willing to help at this sort of thing. This is there is no evidence that the Jews is like, ooh, we get to burn a Christian today? That is not anywhere, there's no evidence of that. So what this demonstrates to us there was some serious tension still between the Christian community and the Jewish community, right? Because you had this accusation that the Jews were especially excited to burn Polycarp, which there's no indication of that, right? So it just demonstrates that there still was some tension between the Jewish community and the Christian community, and we're in the 2nd century. The next thing, and the more significant thing I want you to see is this. When the pyre was ready, Polycarp took off all his clothes, removed his belt, and even tried to unlace his own sandals, which he normally didn't have to do because all the believers were always eager to be the first to have some sort of physical contact with him. This lets us know that very early on in Christianity, it was this idea that if you were an incredibly holy person, godly person, especially someone like Polycarp, that Jesus was so close to you that being even in the presence of that person, the hope was that some of that would rub off on you. Right? That's why Polycarp, he didn't have to unlace his own stuff. Because the people just wanted to be around it. They wanted to serve it, is the point that it's making there. That leads directly to what takes place after Polycarp dies, starting on page 63. This is the earliest documentation we have of what is still done in the church today, which is collecting relics. If you notice, it says, now the devil is jealous, hateful, and evil, the adversary of the whole family of the righteous. He observed Polycarp's great martyrdom and his unassailable character throughout his life. Seeing that Polycarp now wore an imperishable crown and had won a prize that no one could ever snatch, the devil at least made sure we couldn't retrieve the corpse, though many of us dearly wanted to obtain it and commune with Polycarp's holy flesh. If you look down to the second paragraph, it says, therefore, when the centurion saw all the fuss aroused by the Jews, again, there's no evidence of that, he set the corpse out in front of everyone and cremated it according to pagan custom. And so at last we collected up Polycarp's bones, which are dearer to us than jewels and more esteemed than gold, and buried them in a respectable place. This is the earliest documentation of Christians beginning to collect relics of the faithful, extremely faithful, the saints. Today, the practice is still done. The word relic comes from a Latin word which literally means I leave or I abandon. I leave or I abandon. It may seem strange. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm a convert. When I had that lesson, I gotta be honest with you, I was like, that's some creepy stuff. Like, hold on a minute. I gotta be honest, it threw me off a little bit because it seems strange, a tradition which so adheres to the belief in the resurrected body after the final judgment would be attached to the veneration of body parts of faithful who have departed. Okay, and I know for a fact, I got many friends who are Protestants who still think that's just some creepy stuff, man. I can't get on that, right? But the idea is this: remember what I said before about the person who is so faithful up to martyrdom that, I mean, there's scriptural basis for this that they would argue anyway. St. Paul said that it's no longer I that live, but it's Christ who lives inside of me, right? So the idea is that the person is so in line with Christ that it's actually Christ's presence that is just resonating inside of them, so much so that there is a relic, something left behind in their remains. The veneration of sacred relics, as I mentioned, it begins here in the 2nd century. We start seeing, and I'm going to talk about this why when we get in, I think next week or the week after. You see an explosion in this once Constantine becomes emperor. All right, the collection of these relics of saints, either their recognition of their tombs, you have pilgrimage to their tombs, or the relics are, there's a collection of the relics. The relics are believed to have a certain grace or charism associated with them. Modern day, okay, how many here are Catholics in this room? What's the first thing, I shouldn't say first thing, second thing that the priest and or deacon does when they approach the altar? Anybody but Andrew. Anybody but Andrew. Marissa. Gave the punchline. They kissed the altar. Most, no, yeah, you're right. It is what I mean. Most people don't know that though. They see them kissing the altar, and most people, I've heard it said at when they give little kids tour of the church and they say, well, they're kissing the altar because that's where the sacrifice is going to take place. That's not what they kiss the altar. Okay, they give honor to the altar and bow anytime you're on the altar, right? But the kiss is because of the relic. So in other words, I'm saying, if you don't know, every altar in every Catholic parish has a relic inside the altar. Yes.
So who's in our?
Huh?
Who's in the altar? Like what?
I have no idea. You're gonna have to now. I bet PJ knows. Pedro Chavez. I bet he knows. Do you know Andrew?
Well,
Do you know Andrew?
In the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Chapel, there actually is not a relic in that altar. There is one in the Teresa Calcutta Chapel though, because they're not actually required to have relics in them anymore. I don't know who it's in Teresa Calcutta Chapel, but I know that's the only one that has one here.
Every parish that I've been to, if you ask them, there's somebody there. Usually it's the secretary. The secretary knows everybody. But somebody that will know what now, early church, whatever the name of the church was, that was a relic that was in there. Okay. But that's early church. Now, generally speaking, they can tell you what relic is in there. If you pull back the altar cloth, you can't see the relic, but you can see the case in which the relic is in.
I could tell you who the relic is at St. Sebastian's altar, and at St. Pius X. It's traditional feast days today.
So he just gives extra. I didn't ask for all that, did I? Did ask for all that, but thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. The point is, so relics is still part of the church today. There are 3 classes of relics, or 3 degrees of relics. I want you to know. First degree is the remains of the saint themselves. Right? Usually it's a piece of bone. Usually. A second degree will be something that the saint either wore, used, or that touched the first degree relic of the saint. Or the tomb of the Interestingly, okay, so you know how, and I'm not laughing because I'm not making light of relics. I'm laughing because it's so, when we talk about the explosion of relics, you know how if you go and buy something, it's a collector's item. What's something that someone who's a collector, when they buy an item, what do they always ask whether the person has? Right, you got some documentation. I need a certificate of authenticity before I pay money for this, right? It gets touchy with relics. Right now, don't do it right now. But if you were to Google relics, people got relics to sell you, right? Well, which by the way, you ain't supposed to sell. That's another interesting thing. You're not supposed to sell relics. It's a mortal sin, right? It's a mortal sin to sell relics. But what you sell is the case that it's in. You can sell the case, but you can't sell the relic. If it's a plastic case, this plastic just happens to be $500. I'm just saying, they're not selling the relic though. We're selling the case. So just be careful with, I personally wouldn't spend no money on a relic unless I know. For example, I have a first degree relic of St. John Vianney in my home. I know it's a first degree relic because I received it from, I know it's a first degree relic because I received it from Cardinal O'Malley as a gift when I was working in the Archdiocese. No money associated. And I'm hearing from a cardinal. So in case y'all don't know, Cardinal O'Malley and Pope is like this. They're like buddies. Okay. They talk to each other literally. I think on a daily basis they talk to each other. So there's a level of trust that's there. Right? And he knows I have a fine St. John Vianney interest in his life. Yes.
So I asked you today, and he said
You asked him right now?
Yeah.
No, go ahead. What's PJ got for us? What's PJ got for us?
So in the LCP chapel, it's a first degree relic of St. Teresa. And he doesn't know.
And you said there's nobody in the main chapel?
As far as I know, there is no relic there.
Now y'all go, baby. I'm going into the chapel, pull it back to altar cloth. Look,
There's a like
a case there.
there's like a crucifix that's not in the altar that I think is on the altar that has a relic, but there's no
Oh,
relic actually in the
got
altar.
you. Okay. So there is a relic on the altar, but it's not
Yes.
in the altar. Gotcha. So you almost got me in trouble. All right. All right, cool. All right. So what I want you to do for the, and I'm going to post, yes.
Third class relic.
I didn't say the third one?
No.
Yeah, I did.
I think you mentioned.
Touch.
Yeah, you mentioned part of it, but you said it right after you said the second class.
Oh, okay. So second class is something someone, so it could be a piece of clothing that they wore. It could be a pen, literally, for St. Catherine Dressel, there's a pencil that she used. That's a relic. Third would be something that touched a first class relic. Not a second class, but a first class relic. Right? So let's say you had a cloth that wiped the brow of a saint after they passed. That's a third class relic. You have something that bumped up against here, or a big one is the spear that pierced Jesus. Right? That is the third class relic, right? It touched Jesus. Okay. Or the splinters from the crucifix that he was on. Those will all be third class relics.
Have you ever been to St. Anthony's Chapel in Pittsburgh?
I'm going to say no.
Okay, well, they have the second most relics in the world.
Oh, yeah, no, I haven't been there.
They have a second class relic probably, actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, one of our-
No, I've not been there. I haven't been to a chapel. All right. So for the assignment, just so you know, I haven't posted it yet. It probably won't get posted until tomorrow. Before the assignment, since we didn't get to Origins text, it's going to be, I'm going to prompt you on a section of Origin specifically. Section on Origin where it talks about two sections. The section is the difference between the virtue of believers and unbelievers and the importance of verbal confession. Read those sections, and I'm going to ask you and prompt you a question off of those sections. Okay? But
When will it be due?
it won't be due till Wednesday because we don't have class on Monday. Okay? For Wednesday, all you have to have read for Wednesday is what's assigned in the text, the textbook.